Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. My name is Courtney Lovely Evans, and I have the privilege of serving as the Director of Athletics at Palm Beach Atlantic University. I've had the opportunity to participate in several NCAA leadership development programs that I believe prepared me for the chair, the Dr. Charles Whitcomb Leadership Institute, and Achieving Communication Success. Both of those programs allowed me to meet several thought leaders in our industry, as well as me working on developing my personal leadership philosophy. As a leader, it's important for you to communicate your expectations to your staff. At Palm Beach Atlantic University, we are developing Christian game changers, and it is our desire to be the standard in Division II.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. I am joined by Dr. Miriam Merrill. Dr. Merrill is the Director of Athletics at Pomona Pitzer Colleges. Greetings, Dr. Merrill.
Thank you so much for having me.
Glad you're here. Now, you've been in that position for 2 years, I believe?
Yeah, 2 years. Started during the pandemic.
Started during the pandemic, was an interesting experience in itself. I guess in college athletics for roughly 16 years, including some time as a track coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So excellent experience. I have you on. I want to talk about hiring for fit, right? In terms of culture.
Sure.
And a lot of people approach that different ways. But I wonder if you had an experience that you could probably talk about without being specific, right? Without naming
Sure.
any names, but experiences where you have hired people and they fit well, right? Even before you're an athletic director, or you hired somebody and thought they would fit well and they may not have fit. So tell me about your approach in terms of trying to figure out if somebody will fit in the culture that you're interested in.
Yeah, so I think as far as finding someone with fit, I think it really boils down to the questions that you ask. So, at the end of the day, and in some of the positions, right, as it relates to like whether it's the senior associate AD, all the people have skills, right, or they've had the experience. So the questions that I normally ask are not like, tell me what you've done with compliance, right, because you've either done it or you've not. But like, what type of coworker are you? What will your student athletes say about you, right? Those types of things, because kind of the culture that I expect is this very collaborative culture, right? So if you are someone who wants to do everything yourself and not really rely and depend and connect with other people, then that's kind of the piece there. So like I said, in the interview questions, I try to ask, be very specific. I think self-awareness is the question that I always try to make sure that I get at too, because I need to know what people need and want, what they know about themselves, which is really important. And as it relates to not fitting, I think, yes, I have had a couple of folks who haven't been a good fit. And that's the thing that I always remember is they're not bad people, right? It's just not a good fit. So let me help this person find a place where they can fit. And, maybe it was the process, not asking enough questions but sometimes, people bring a representative, and that's part of the interview process is you just don't know because you spend, 30 minutes, right, on a phone, and then you might have them on campus for a full day. But yeah, I think sometimes it can be difficult to find that out.
It can be hit or miss, right? Here's what I wonder about the process of asking questions, which I obviously do because I'm on a podcast all the time. But where do you get your questions from? Is it just natural intuition from where you've been, or do you research best questions to find out how self-aware someone is, right? And then have those questions evolved over time when you may have hit or may have missed on something?
Yeah, the questions have evolved over time. I think, everybody always says tell us about yourself, right? Like, I absolutely do not ask that one. I was on a search committee with a colleague of mine at my previous institution, and she started the conversation with, oftentimes when somebody leaves a job or applies for a job, there's something pushing them toward that job from where they're currently at and something pulling them. The job itself is pulling them. So what's pushing and pulling you? It's a question I always ask, and
Really?
I love it. So anyone listening, if you ever interview with me, that's going to be your first question, right? I think that one's a little deeper than tell me about yourself. So I think ultimately, right, some of those questions have evolved from just the basic ones. As it relates to kind of the deeper personal questions, I'll kind of try to Google some questions. I'll also ask questions like, what type of person do you work best with? Or what type of personality do you find most challenging? And I don't think there's a good or a bad to that, but it just helps me understand, hey, it's really hard for me to work with somebody who's an I, right? If we're talking disc, that's okay, right? So I just need to make sure that others know who are collaborating with you, who is an I, that you know how to work with this person in a way. So yeah, they have evolved.
Thinking about your process, right, in the various positions that you've been in, whether it be as a coach, whether it be an administrator, or even working on your doctorate, have you been asked questions that you thought were excellent that you're like, you know what? That question forced me to give a lot of actually who I am beyond a representative that you have taken into your process of hiring people?
Sure. Actually, in my interview process at Pomona Pitzer, one of the questions they said is kind of how do you stay grounded, right? And I felt that was a very vulnerable question because I had to talk about how I connect with people and how I kind of manage stress, right? When most people sort of be like, I can handle everything, right? But to be vulnerable in that moment, I think was a great question, which allowed me to be human, I think, in the process. So yeah.
How do you stay grounded? That's an interesting question. How did you
Yeah.
answer that?
Yeah. You said, how did I answer it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, so I said, yeah, I connect with my family. I'm very much a family person. But I did disclose and I said, I hope you all don't judge me. But there's an event that goes on in New Orleans it's a convention like the, NACTA, but it's for folks in the spirits industry, in the bartending industry. So there's like seminars and all of that. So I was telling them that I go there and just like learn
Really?
about like cocktails, history of cocktails, myths. Yeah.
How do you even discover that there's a
Yeah,
bartending
I know.
convention?
So
Like,
yeah, I have a college friend of mine who works for a company that does flavorings so you know how you have cucumber vodka, all that. So she works in that department flavoring. And so she would go down there, entertain clients, all of that. And she was telling me about it. I was like, that sounds like so much fun.
how often
And
have
it
you
is.
been
I've
to
been
that?
going, oh gosh, this is my 5th year. It'll be my 5th
You go
year.
every year.
Every year. As an enthusiast. That's what my title is.
And is it like a tasting situation? Everybody's sitting there down in cucumber vodka and the
Right.
newest, latest flavor of
Right. Yeah. So yes and no.
Chipotle
Yeah.
flavored.
Absolutely. I mean, like it's so interesting. So
Yeah.
some of the kind of most famous mixologists across the world are there talking about like new things, how to balance drinks. One of the sessions that I signed up for this year is about milk punch. So, and hope I'm going to explain this correctly, but they basically kind of take milk, cook it off, and then add alcohol to it so it's clear, but the viscosity of it is like milk. So it's almost like you're drinking milk, but it's clear and it's an alcoholic beverage.
Really?
Yeah, so kind of those new things and drinks with whole egg in it. And so there's a lot. The key is to sip and dump. That's what
Oh, really? So you're not just
you don't
drinking.
drink. No,
It's
no,
not go
not
down.
at
It's
all.
not a drink fest.
No, not at all.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That process, that milk punch. I don't know if that's the process. Pepsi has some new flavor that's supposed to be smoother or something. That's the process they use for that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good
that's
question. I don't know.
That's super interesting. So what do you come away from that with? I mean, it may not be obvious, but it sounds like it's obvious to me that this is completely away from college athletics.
Yes.
I am learning about mixing drinks and flavors of drinks and how they make drinks. And so this is a complete relief, no bullet points and all that kind of stuff. Tell me about what you come away from that conference with.
Yeah. Oftentimes it's about, because the spirits industry and the bartending industry is very social, right? So ways in which bartenders kind of connect with folks to get them to come back, right? And regulars and all of that. And just the science of a cocktail, right? I was talking to a colleague of mine and he was talking about how he had a beverage and the bartender was just dumping a bunch of stuff in it, right? Like most really good mixologists there's a balance to it. There's a proportion to it. Whether it's citrus or not, depends on whether it goes over ice or not, whether it's shaken or stirred. So I think the science of it is really interesting to me too, which is why I asked them, like, don't judge me. It's not about like
oh man, that's
drinking.
super interesting.
It really is.
So then at home you have all types of unique international,
I do.
low key in the middle of Montana flavors that you found.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So all types of so whiskey is really kind of my beverage of choice. And so I have a lot of whiskeys, a lot of gins. And actually, so one of the sessions I went to was how to build a home bar.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so they said,
in a certain place?
Not necessarily in a certain place, but in a certain order. Yeah, so they said vodka is usually kind of the safest one, so start there. And like anytime that you go to get groceries, like maybe once a month, buy a bottle of something. And then once you kind of have all the 5 main spirits, then you start to get the vermouths, Camparis, the liqueurs, right? All of that stuff to kind of mix in.
I'm not really a drinker. What are the 5 main liquors?
Okay, let me see if I can name them. So it's gin, vodka, tequila, whiskey, mezcal, I think is the 5th one. Did I miss anybody? Yeah, because cognac kind of falls up under the whiskey
really?
group. Yeah. Even though the difference between, okay, now we're getting way off topic here.
Real quick, we'll circle back around, I promise.
The difference between cognac and kind of whiskeys is that cognac is made from grapes.
Okay.
So, yeah.
What about mezcal and
tequila?
Tequila. Aren't they similar from the same plant or
same
something?
family. Yep.
Yeah, super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then you come back, you get back home.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you maybe take a day.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day, the bullet points are right back on the list and you dive right back into it. Do you feel refreshed when you come back from that conference? How do you approach coming back in to work, I guess, something like that?
I mean, it's really just like anything. And I mean, I feel just as refreshed coming from NACTA, from NCA Convention, from women leaders, right? So it's that same type of pouring into me and the knowledge. And I think, to your question earlier, it's about the knowledge that I gained too while I'm there. And same thing, like whenever I share these stories, people are like, what? Right? And I sound like the expert in the room, right? So it's a great conversation piece.
Keep going to be referring back to this episode. Like, wait, what was she saying?
Right. Absolutely.
What was that milk situation
exactly.
she was talking about? I think I'm going to need that. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So circling back to fit, if someone didn't fit, okay, both sides of the equation, right? We tend to analyze what didn't work, but we don't always analyze what did, right?
Sure.
So you think about someone who may not have fit that you hired, and do you sit back and say, well, what didn't work there, right? Was it me as a person who hired the person? Was it us as our culture? Was it this person who came in and just didn't fit, or what was the analyzation process you use for someone who didn't? And then someone who comes in and who's like a champion, like fit, culture, all that. At some point, you probably want to say, where did I strike gold on this person?
Sure.
What was it? Like, so what's your analyzation process for post interviewing and hiring and possibly letting someone go, all those things?
Yeah. So I think whenever I've had to separate with, a colleague, I do always reflect, right, on kind of where I missed. Is it the position itself? Did I not set them up for success in the beginning, right? All of those questions are things that I reflect. And there's been some things like, oh, I think this job might have been too much, right? So how can I, for the next person, pull pieces out of this job so that this next person can be successful? Or what can I articulate on the front end about this job that may not have been clear during the interview process, right? So I think that's really important. I think anytime anyone in my department, whether it be student athletes, coaches, or whatever, are struggling, it always comes back to me, like, what do I need to help in this situation and what did I miss? Because it is a collective and a collaborative process. So in order for everybody to be successful, I have to be there to be able to support them in the right way, right? So what things do I need to change? I think those who I've struck gold on, I mean, what I will say is I've struck more gold than I have not, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the funny thing is, when you do have to separate with somebody, talking to colleagues, and people are always like, yeah, it's going to happen, right? Like, it's going to happen. But, I think those who I've struck gold with initially, kind of those moments that you have with a candidate that aren't the question asking, it's the walking them from one room to another to meet with one group or another, right? Or the one-on-one lunch that you have with them that allows you to really see kind of who they are as people, I think is helpful.
Excellent. I'll ask a couple questions here before we wrap. You mentioned you do some self-analysis if something didn't work, happy when something did work. That whole concept of introspection, right? Tell me about that in terms of, you don't want to take things personal if something doesn't work, right?
Right.
You don't want to take all the credit if something does, but you still, when you take the time to think about things, you still are thinking about, did I do something wrong there? What's happening there? Tell me about your process of being introspective as a leader.
Yeah, I think it's critical as a leader to be self-aware, introspective, right? Always kind of analyzing the situation. Sometimes I can overanalyze, right? But I think that's part of being a leader.
You're right.
But yeah, in any situation, because you don't want it to happen again, right? So it's like, what things can I change and reflect and think about? But it takes, authenticity to say, ooh, I messed up here, right? Or, ooh, I probably didn't do that quite as well. But ultimately, it is about how can I set everybody else up for success? And if I'm not interested in figuring out the role that I play in that, then I'm never going to allow everyone to be as successful as they could be.
Yeah, which is important. Last question here, thinking about the future, especially at a unique institution like Pomona Pitzer Colleges. When you try to plan for the future, sometimes it's hard not to think about what's happening now. I wonder about your process for being strategic and thinking about 3, 4, and 5 years down the road.
Yeah. So as it relates to just hiring and all of that, where my department
Just
is.
hiring, the department, whatever comes to
Yeah.
mind when I ask you that type
Yeah.
of question.
Okay. So I would say that I am a very forward thinker. So I am always trying to be 3 or 4 steps ahead. And how can we think about? So one of the things that I presented on at NACTA was about restorative justice. So I'm going to go a little bit off topic, but I think this is helpful in how I kind of think forward. And there are some departments out there that are using restorative justice, but we have really grounded our kind of decision making as it relates to like student athlete misconduct and how we relate to each other as student athletes, coaches, colleagues, with a restorative mindset, which means this sense of community. And it's very opposite of cancel culture, which is what I am really focused on, right? I don't think that we can cancel people. I think we can cancel things, especially on a college campus, right? And that's really kind of where I'm talking about. And so being able to help our student athletes shift away from you did something wrong, you're canceled, to you did something wrong, let's hold you accountable, let's re-engage you in our community, right? And there are times when that can't happen, but ultimately trying to make that shift. So I say all that to say, right, forward thinking about ways that we can help develop our students, help make them better citizens, and also kind of catch them up because we only have them for 4 years. And there's research out there that talks about how our student athletes developmentally are like preteens, right? So we need to engage them in a different way because in 4 years, they are going to be adults out in the world with no coaches, student athletes, student affairs, right, to help them navigate the world. So,
right, which is excellent. Help me out with the definition of restorative in the context of how you just used it.
Yeah. So it is more about accountability, empathy. So, like I said, as
opposed to cancel.
Yes,
right?
Yes. As opposed to you're off the team, right? It's how can we help you be a better person, be a better human. And as long as the student athlete is willing to engage in that process, and a lot of times education comes with that too, right? Then we can go through that process and figure out how we re-engage you in our community.
Yeah, which is excellent. This has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Yes, ma'am. That was Dr. Miriam Merrill. She is the Director of Athletics at Pomona Pitzer Colleges. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.